Welcome to Season 4 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today we're going to talk about customer journey management and its relationship to change management. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Erin Zentz, Director of Experience Design at AARP. Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Greg. I've really enjoyed listening to the show. I think it's a cool peek into a lot of different industries and things that businesses are doing that we should all care about right now. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to, I know you and I have had several conversations unrecorded about this stuff, so I'm glad we get to share some of this with the audience. So looking forward to diving in. So why don't we start with you giving a little background on yourself and what you're currently doing at AARP?
Sure. So I want to make the pun up front that it's been a journey to get here. So I started out in advertising, doing media planning, and I knew that I wanted to jump kind of from the offline world to the online world. So I got my feet wet in analytics in the agency world. And then I knew that I wanted to jump into the client side from the agency side. So I got my MBA at the University of Maryland, and through some connections I made there, was connected with a role in AARP. And so that was 7.5 years ago. So I've been at AARP for quite some time now, though the tenure of most employees there is even longer than that. But I've had a really awesome opportunity to move to a few different positions at AARP. I started doing web analytics for our .org site. And then I had an opportunity to join our customer experience team, or consumer experience team, as we call it, at AARP when it was first being stood up. And that my role on the team initially was to launch our Net Promoter Score. So that was introduced about 5 years ago, and so I stood that up for about a year, pressure tested it in market to see if it was an appropriate measure for AARP to use. And then once it was, kind of transitioned more into a role of how does the organization measure their impact on NPS, which is a question I feel like we all want to know. And so help stand up a experience metrics team within the consumer experience team in AARP. And then I had another opportunity to jump into a role leading the journey management practice. And this was a new practice that we were standing up as we kind of increased the maturity of our CX practice. And so that is what I'm doing now, leading the the journey management team within AARP.
Great. Well, when you and I were preparing for the show, you had brought up I think an interesting concept that I haven't really dived into on this show before, but it's this idea of customer journey management is in many ways a change management process, because even though the focus is going to be on the external consumers, it's still people, processes, and platforms internally that are needed in order to enable new, modified, optimized journey, sometimes all of the above. And all of that stuff requires internal cooperation, internal resources. So how do you look at things like this at AARP, and how do you kind of reconcile those two things, the journey management and the change management?
Yeah, I think this is just a fascinating topic. And I think change management is going to become an even bigger focus for a lot of big organizations and probably small organizations, as well as we do more innovation in the technology space and how we're showing up to consumers, et cetera, because it really takes a framework and a process for making successful and sustainable change in organizations. So how this sort of happened at AARP, AARP stood up a CX team, like I said, about 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And we kicked it off with an early win, and that was identifying an opportunity to basically treat our consumers better when they were calling to inform us that a member had passed.
Mm.
And this is probably a really unique opportunity to AARP, but we realized that we were not approaching that conversation with consumers or with members or with members' spouses or children or whomever in a very empathetic way. And so we basically organized, I want to say it was probably like 10 plus different business units within AARP, probably 40 plus different people to just make that experience better for our consumers. And so that was a really early win and proof point that we were going to benefit from CX. And it was probably one of our first journeys that we took on, right? Because we thought about from that initial phone call, all of the different steps downstream that need to happen, both on the consumer facing side and on the internal facing side to make that change
Yeah.
and show up the way that we wanted to show up. So we found an early win, and then we kind of really ramped up what we knew as CX. So I'd say we used the model that the book Outside In proposes of how to organize a team, a CX team within an organization. So we had a design group, a VOC practice, a strategy practice, and ultimately a measurement practice. And we were doing a lot of really great work around the organization, partnering with lots of different groups to make experiences better, and found our footing and introduced a consumer commitment to the organization. And so that was really kind of a vision for how the organization was going to show up to consumers and making sure that everyone was singing from the same songbook, basically, in terms of how we were putting experiences out there. But as we were doing that, I'd say that we were really focused on moments, right? Interaction points.
Right.
And there wasn't a lot of focus on the upstream or downstream from that. And so we started to realize that we needed to think a lot more about consumers' journeys and not just the success in that moment, but really the outcomes that we were seeing. That, how were we able to deliver the consumer outcomes? Why were they doing the thing with us? It probably wasn't to do the thing with us. It probably was to find success in some really personal
Right.
way that
Right.
impacted their life. And so we started to figure out, like, what kind of changes in the organization do we need to make this happen at scale? What are the gaps that we have from an operations standpoint, from a technology standpoint? What kind of organizational changes do we need to make? And so since then, and so that was probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we've been sort of working through a list basically on
Yeah.
what needs to happen to make these changes. And I think that, you know, change management principles will say that there's like the culture side of change, but the culture side of change is not going to be successful without the operational side of change. You need to make it easier for people to do this kind of work, even if you have a culture that this is the right work to do. And
Yeah.
so, what I've been focused on and my team has been focused on over the last couple of years is closing those gaps, is developing those processes, creating those templates. And as we've done that, we started by standing up a proof of concept. So we chose two journeys that we believed were critical for the organization to take on and to manage more effectively, and critical for the consumer to get right, both to improve consumer experience, but also to improve the likelihood that they will be loyal members to AARP. And so, in that proof of concept, we had a really good opportunity to learn what we needed to do to actually do and see what was working and what wasn't working and why it wasn't working. And we changed a lot of things. We changed the operating model of how we organized teams around these journeys. We implemented or I guess we gave authority to a journey lead. So someone who had full authority over a journey. They were the subject matter expert of the journey. They had, the decision authority. They created the vision. And then we also organized a journey team that would support them. And these were the people in the organization that were already close to the journey, had some sort of ownership over maybe a channel or a product
Okay.
within that journey, and brought them all together to align around a vision, um, and basically, create a roadmap for the changes that we'd make um, to support that journey. So, we could say CX is important. We could say that managing to journeys were important, but really until we were able to sort of pave the road for employees to work in that way, to operate in that way without friction, we weren't going to see change. So that's what we've been focused on for the last year. And a lot has worked, and there's some things that need more time, and we're continuing down that path.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean it's definitely a big undertaking. So you mentioned several things here. There's different teams, there's different initiatives, there's different moments, and then there's this overarching journey as well. What's the data component of this? I mean, each of those things has data associated with it. Even the employee experience has data associated with it. How have you approached the role of data and aligning all of that stuff so that you can get measurements and really just kind of understand not only internal measurements of efficiencies and everything, but obviously the external measurements of moving the needle on consumer engagement and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, data is really at the core of all of this, right? And we definitely found in our original analysis, we found both, you know, technical capabilities that we needed to improve around how we managed and used data, as well as organizational changes that we needed to make, you know, to improve who had access to data, how quickly we were able to access data, um, you know, governance around data, all kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
yes, data is certainly at the core of this because we need, in order to create a journey that is seamless and relevant for our consumers that helps them, achieve their job to be done, we need to know what their job to be done is, and we need data to tell us where they are seeing friction or experiencing friction, and when they are successful and when they aren't successful. And I think we, like most organizations, have more data than we know what to do with. It's never really an issue of we don't have the data. It's we don't do we know the right questions
Yeah.
to ask to get to what we need to get to. So we're really lucky in that we have multiple sources of data. So I'm not really even speaking just about data, the way you think about like how to track business outcomes and business metrics, but also like what kind of consumer insights do we have living within our research department? What kind of consumer insights do we have living within our really fantastic and mature voice of the consumer practice within our CX team? So we had data that looked at interactions that our consumers were taking, but maybe more importantly, data that told us the perceptions of those interactions. So how consumers were feeling about the interactions. And so we really wanted to take this balanced approach to both understand consumer and business outcomes. If we were able to help the consumer achieve their outcomes, what did that mean for the business? And so We basically started by asking more challenging questions of our data and research teams, both in terms of discovery and in terms of how we were measuring the journeys. And I would say we learned a few things. Really, tactically, we learned that we probably needed to make some investments in Martech tools.
Yeah.
Did we have what we needed from a capability standpoint in house? We have an amazing group of data scientists at AARP that help us understand, everything about our consumers and our business. What could they do to help us? But also, did we need to look at external tools that would help us enable this kind of thinking, and more importantly, probably scale this kind of work, because we have millions of members, we have millions of interaction points, and we have we have thousands of employees who want to know more about how they can help consumers achieve their goals. So we learned that we probably needed to start looking at what kind of martech solutions were out there. We also learned that we don't want to sacrifice progress for perfection.
Yeah.
So, there's a fine line, especially when you're talking with data teams and data scientists. Um, they always want to get to statistical significance before we make decisions. But we're kind of trying to move to be more agile, and we certainly don't want to not be confident in our decisions. So we still know we need to have that confidence. But when can we use proxies? When can we, use directional data to help us move quickly, learn what the consumer is doing, react to that, and then learn some more? So we 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 started to have to have conversations with our data teams in a little bit different of a way, push them to think a little bit differently, and they've been an amazing partner in doing that, and innovating in how they do their work and the insights that they bring to us, which has made us hugely successful.
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to ask about a little bit. I think you did already touch on it a little bit, but just these are big. I mean, digital transformation is pretty much what we're talking about here, right? So this is a big undertaking for any organization, but especially the larger it gets. And so um, I like that you mentioned the agile way of measuring progress. But how were you able to change that thought process of, obviously you're not measuring at the end state, 2 months into this, a multi-year initiative. So how did you kind of have to reshift and adjust your expectations of, just being able to not only manage expectations but also measure success, make sure that you're making the right steps and going in the right direction, knowing that you don't have everything needed at that point in time.
I think how we set up our proof of concept when we first kicked this off was really helpful in setting the right expectations for the organization. So we right off the bat said we are not measuring this proof of concept based on, honestly, the value it brings to the consumer or the value it brings to the business. We are measuring this based on, is the operating model that we're implementing sustainable? Are we able to socialize this work and gain buy-in? What are we learning, and what kind of changes or recommendations can we make based on those learnings? And so how we established the proof of concept measurement and socialize that to make sure that we were all super clear that we were
Yeah.
not going to see the impact from this in year one. But along the way, we made sure that we were showing success. And again, this was probably not like the typical success that you hope to see, in year 2, 3, but we were holding retrospectives on, when we made a decision, was that the right decision? What could we have done better next time? And we were getting feedback from many of our internal stakeholders in that way. We established surveys for our journey leads and our journey teams that we implemented at the beginning of their sort of collaboration and partnership around these journeys, but and a year in. So
Yeah.
we now have a pre and post survey of the journey teams to understand, like, did this change the way that they're working? Are they clear on their role? Are they seeing more impact from this? And so we, from that work, we are also understanding what we still need to do. And so
Yeah.
it's not that we're waiting a year to figure out what's not working. What we've already identified opportunities, such as we need to improve our ability to test and test faster.
Yeah.
We now know what trainings are working that we're providing our journey leads and our journey team, what templates and processes are working. So it's really about kind of incremental improvements, getting a read on those, and then even sometimes developing proxies. So we do ultimately need to understand, is this having an impact on our consumers and our business? But we are we're a membership organization, and so the true, you know we don't understand if consumers are pleased with what we're offering them until maybe a year, 2, 3 years after their
Yeah.
initial join with us. We can't wait that long to figure that out. So in some cases, we are using proxies, and correlating different interaction points with longer term measures to understand, are we headed in the right direction?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about prioritization of those things, because again, there's a lot of stuff. The approach, the pilot project approach, and just that. Um, I think that's such a smart way to do things. But how do you figure out what's in the pilot project, and how do you manage competing priorities, from whether it's the internal process improvement, cost savings, whatever those may be, as well as the ultimate end result, which is the member satisfaction and member experience. So how do you what was kind of the thought process of prioritizing what gets done first versus put off to a later phase?
The reality is striking. While we can stream movies on demand and order anything to our doorstep within a click, healthcare interactions often feel needlessly complex. Healthcare marketers, this one's for you. In Shop, Stream, Heal, author Adeline Ashley shares actionable insights from industry leaders like Netflix, Amazon, and Delta, showing how healthcare can thoughtfully adapt their winning strategies. This isn't about technology for technology's sake. It's about making healthcare more accessible, intuitive, and human. Drawing from real-world successes and lessons learned, the book shows you how to create healthcare experiences that truly meet patient needs while preserving clinical excellence. Shop, Stream, Heal by Adeline Ashley features a foreword from Dave O'Flanagan, CEO of Sitecore. It's published by the Agile brand and now available in print and digital formats on Amazon. Go to shopstreamheal.com for more information.
This is the $1 million question.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah, yeah, for especially for AARP. Because if you know anything about AARP, first of all, I said we are a membership organization. We're actually a social mission organization with a membership. We're not a membership organization with a social mission. And we do a lot. We have the website, we have our lobbying efforts, we have the magazine, we have all kinds of things, right? So there's a lot of priorities for the organization at any given time. We are lucky enough, and I won't actually say lucky because a lot of work went into it, but we have a very mature and advanced VOC, Voice of the Consumer program at AARP. And that was really the first, leg of the CX team 5 or 6 years ago. So we're able to do a lot of listening to what consumers are telling us is important, and we make a lot of decisions based on that. But we also, we have a lot of different audiences. We serve the 50 plus population and sometimes under 50. And there's a lot of different needs. There's a lot of different types of people,
Yeah.
that we're serving. And so it's challenging to figure out what should come first. And so what we've been kind of going back and forth with, is it, do we need a complex scoring model to figure out like, okay, what is our business impact and what is the impact to the consumer and how many business units are involved and,
Right.
all of that stuff. Or is it simply like there's an insight that there's an opportunity for impact and we need to take advantage of that? And I say we do a little bit of both. Obviously, uh, we have a dashboard, we have goals that we need to hit. That's obviously a big part of it is what is going to help us achieve those goals. And, I think AARP is doing an amazing job of having a balanced dashboard. There's a little bit of consumer, there's a little bit of business. And so that helps us make the right decisions in terms of what we prioritize. But I think at a smaller level, we also need to look at, what is feasible in the short term from a technical standpoint. As we're going through this digital transformation, we're improving our capabilities. Something that isn't feasible today may be feasible in 6 months. So do we wait for that to happen to make that change, to prioritize that effort? Are there accelerators that we can take advantage of that maybe one group is already focused on but isn't widely known or socialized, and we can force that collaboration. But also, it boils down to really what is the organization ready to take on.
Yeah.
We have lots of different places that we're driving impact, everything from caregiving to Medicare to helping our consumers find work. Where is the energy for the organization in any given moment, and how can we take advantage of that?
So, last topic here, I just want to touch on the employee experience component of this. So, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the show, but as far as obviously it takes a lot of people across a lot of teams to do this, and we're thinking about the processes and everything like that. But there's also that let's just call it the softer side of that, which is making sure that employees really understand their relationship to the end results and are motivated to do that and everything. So where does that kind of fall in this? Kind of going back to the beginning here of journey management as change management. Where does that employee experience component fit into all of this?
So I think that at AARP, we are really lucky that we have such a strong mission.
Yeah.
There's no doubt on like why we exist as an organization and what we're trying to achieve on behalf of our members. So we kind of have a leg up in that space. We're
Yeah.
not selling someone like a trinket, which that is, there's obviously a need for that too. But we truly have a mission, and I think all of our employees are very we're all rallied around that mission.
Yeah.
But I do think that there are a couple of things that we've really been focused on to more tactically. And so one is kind of like I mentioned, there's the culture side and then there's the process side of change management. And so we can ask our employees, to put on a smile on their face and change the way that they're working, or we can show that we're enabling them to do that. And
Yeah.
so we've done a lot of work to hopefully make employees' lives easier, make it more efficient for them to do this kind of work and understand their impact on the consumer outcomes, whether that is through data dashboards or storytelling of the impact that we're seeing from the consumers. But I want to touch on, like, there's this idea I keep hearing a lot of these days around psychological safety.
Yeah.
And this is a big change. And there are always going to be people who are more excited about the change than others. And what I've tried to do as a leader is make sure that there's a safe space for people to share their excitement about this and their trepidations about this, and all of those are valid. And so I'm trying to make sure that that's a big part of every meeting, every ask, every socialization, because I think that if people are comfortable to share their perspective without worrying like that they're going to be um, you know uh, they're going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like harmed or
Right. Right.
for doing that, then I think that's really going to drive collaboration, a team spirit, and they're going to be more willing to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. I always like to ask for recommendations of other things that people can read, watch, listen to, anything. Just I know it kind of ran the gamut here of topics here, but anything you'd recommend somebody listen, watch, read related to these topics.
Yeah. Well, I think, for anyone who's listening, you're off to a great start because you're listening to this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I will rave about a program that I just finished, which is the Northwestern Kellogg Strategic Change Management course. And so this was an 8-week course, all online, self-paced. And I just found that so valuable. I feel like I've been doing change management work for the last few years in multiple roles. And this was my first introduction to the, academia behind it. The frameworks are like, oh, this is why I'm doing this, or this is why we need to do this. And
Right.
it really gave me a structure from which to operate. And so I highly recommend that course. I'm also reading, and I will say slowly reading it because that course was a lot of work over the last 8 weeks. But the Lean Startup book, because as we think about these big changes, I think that it's akin to starting a business, because you really want to show incremental value and make sure that your stakeholders or your shareholders are seeing the value in the work that you're doing right off the bat, so they continue to make the investments, not necessarily from a monetary standpoint, but from a time standpoint, a resource standpoint, an energy standpoint. So I found a lot of really interesting learnings from the Lean Startup book as well.
Wonderful. Well, Erin, thanks so much for joining the show. It's great to talk with you again. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, well, because we're doing this work internally, we don't have a blog or anything, but hopefully that as the world starts to re-enter conferences and such, we'll be, at conferences. But feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, Erin Zentz. I have personally found a lot of the conversations I've had with people doing this work, all over the country, all over the world, to be incredibly helpful. I think there's a community willing to share what's working and what's not working. And I've found a lot of benefit from that. So if anyone wants to reach out and have those conversations, I'm definitely willing.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Erin Zentz, Director of Experience Design at AARP, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile World with Greg Kihlstrom. See you next week. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.